CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliet Mann.
And I'm Luigi Barkil. Our top stories. The full force of the law. Brazil's president promises rioters will be punished as police regain control of Congress after it was stormed by protesters.
China reopens, a huge boost for the travel sector as Beijing lifts restrictions on the world's biggest outgoing tourist population.
Driving into the record books, Rolls-Royce sells more than 6,000 cars in a year for the first time in its history.
The UN calls for multi-billion-dollar support to help Pakistan rebuild after last year's devastating floods.
And cleared for liftoff. Final preparations for the first space launch from British soil. We're live in Cornwall ahead of the launch of Virgin Orbit.
Brazil's president has declared a security intervention in the capital and vowed to use the full force of the law after thousands of supporters of former far-right leader Jair Bolsonaro stormed government buildings on Sunday.
Demonstrators ransacked the presidential palace, Congress and Supreme Court in Brasilia, calling for Lula da Silva to leave office. Our correspondent Paul Barber reports.
Surveying the damage after a day of extraordinary political violence that struck at the heart of Brazil's institutions. President Lula da Silva, just a week after his inauguration as president, called those responsible for the rampage fanatic fascists and promised they would be brought to justice.
I wanted to tell you that all the people who did that will be found and will be punished. They will see that democracy guarantees the right to freedom, freedom of communication, freedom of expression, but it also demands that people respect the institutions that were created to strengthen democracy.
The uprising on Sunday lasted little over 3 hours but caused immense damage to the buildings housing the three branches of government, the Congress, Presidential Palace and Supreme Court. The attack by thousands of yellow and green-clad supporters of far-right former President Jair Bolsonaro was a stunning breach of security. With police now back in charge of the capital, Lula has announced a federal security intervention in Brasilia lasting until the end of the month. He accused Bolsonaro, who lost a bitterly fought campaign against the leftist Lula back in October, of fanning baseless claims of election fraud. It's an eerily similar theme to what played out in the United States in 2021 after Donald Trump's defeat to Joe Biden, although experts say Lula is operating in a different context.
You do not have kind of office holders, except perhaps Bolsonaro's sons, who have embraced the rejectionism, who've embraced the conspiracy theory. There is no kind of Brazilian embrace of the big lie like you had in the United States. And I think that's a very fundamentally different starting point, and that's an advantage for Lula. You also have Lula having to work with a Congress in Brazil that is largely in the hands of his political opponents. So he doesn't have the same start that Joe Biden did with a friendly House and Senate.
Bolsonaro flew out of Brazil on the eve of Lula's inauguration and is currently in Florida. On social media, he expressed his support for democracy and the Constitution and said the invasion of government buildings crossed the line. An uneasy peace has returned to Brasilia, with police surrounding a Bolsonaro supporters camp at the army headquarters. A pro-democracy rally is being held in the capital on Monday night. The political fallout for Brazil is only just beginning. Paul Barber, CGTN.
Well, David Biller from the Associated Press joins us now from Rio de Janeiro. David, it seems hundreds of arrests have been made. What is the latest with the security situation?
So what's happening now is that police, not just in the capital Brasilia, but also in Rio and other cities, are dissembling the encampments of pro-Bolsonaro supporters. These are the people who have been camped out since the election. They are the ones who believe that Bolsonaro was either wronged in a fraudulent election, or they just refuse to accept a Lula win and are pleading with the armed forces to intervene. As of now in Brasilia, where this is massive encampment and where a lot of these people who rioted yesterday were set up, the police are breaking down that campsite, and 1,200 people have been detained. We see people marching with their bags and backpacks and suitcases out of the campsite as well. But 300 people were arrested yesterday, caught in the act. So the latest right now is that, but also authorities are seeking to punish those responsible, not just the people who rioted, but also the people who facilitated this. That's people who financed the transport of the protesters to the city, and that's also authorities, local authorities, who are being accused of standing down and allowing this to happen.
This happened before President Lula had even been in power for a week. I mean, how much of a challenge does this pose to him and his administration?
It certainly is a huge challenge for Lula. He decreed the federal intervention of security in the federal district. So now the federal government is running the security situation there. But I would say this: Lula came into power with a fiercely divided nation, and he's made it his mission to sort of heal society. It's unclear that he would ever be able to do that with this fringe, radical, right-wing group. They hate him, and they have no interest in olive branches or reconciliation. So it's much more about him building together a society that holds dear the values of democracy with the rest of society. And so some people, some analysts who I spoke with, are saying that this could actually play into Lula's hand. He has people who are looking at the destruction of yesterday, and they don't want any part of that. There are politicians who are on the right, who are maybe on the fence on whether they were going to support Lula or not, and they want to distance themselves from Bolsonaro now. They don't want to be seen as associated with violence, with destruction of these monumental buildings. So it may, in fact, help Lula in this challenge, even though it doesn't look like it right now. It's obviously a very, it's early days, and Lula has a lot to accomplish still ahead, but this is clearly going to sort of be a watershed moment where people decide, okay, am I going to be on the side of democracy, or am I going to be on the side of these people who are trashing, the most important government buildings in the country? And a lot of people think that the people will go more towards the side of Lula and democracy instead.
Thanks, David. David Biller from the Associated Press in Rio de Janeiro.
Well, the former President Jair Bolsonaro flew to Florida in the United States 48 hours before his term ended. He said on Twitter that peaceful demonstrations are democratic, but Sunday's invasion of government buildings, quote, crossed the line. Let's take you to Miami in Florida. Our correspondent, Nitza Soledad Perez, is there. Let's start there, Nitza, with what we know about Bolsonaro's presence in the U.S. state.
Well, what we know is that while the Bolsonaro supporters were storming the Brazilian Congress and the presidential offices, the far-right president was thousands of kilometers away. He's here in Florida. He's been in Orlando. He's been living in a rented home. It's owned by a professional mixed martial arts fighter very close to Disney World. He's expected to stay in Florida for at least a month. What many believe is that he came to the United States to escape many of the investigations he's already facing back in Brazil. Now, Mr. Bolsonaro, as it's been mentioned, he has claimed the illegality of the results without any evidence of the presidential election results, which the elections that he lost by 2 percentage points. And he also refused to concede to now President Lula Inácio da Silva. Now, despite all of this and the instigation and the support he provided to all these protesters that turned violent yesterday, days before he left office and decided to come to Florida, just to be safe for his own legal health, he went and he said, urged his supporters to avoid any kind of violence, and also asked them to move on.
And there are obvious parallels being drawn between Mr. Bolsonaro and former U.S. President Donald Trump. I just wonder, what's the White House's reaction been to this, given the incumbent in that office?
Well, U.S. President Joe Biden told reporters that these riots were outrageous. He also took to Twitter later yesterday, and he wrote, "The riots are an assault on democracy and the peaceful transfer of power in Brazil." Now, in addition to that, Democratic lawmakers are urging today, they're asking President Biden to basically expel former President Jair Bolsonaro from the United States. But that's easier said than done. If it happens, it will take a significant amount of time. Why? Because a direct link with solid evidence connecting Bolsonaro and the violence and the riots that happened yesterday would need to be established in a court of law. So the Biden administration could go ahead and revoke the visa it already granted to Jair Bolsonaro. Now, if that doesn't happen, Brazilian authorities could ask formally for an extradition of Jair Bolsonaro. But that could also take some time because they would also need to present substantial evidence to ask for this extradition. But it is definitely likely. And why it could proceed, because there is an extradition treaty between the two countries. So it is a possibility that Jair Bolsonaro would end up extradited from the United States to his home country, Brazil.
Complex situation. Nitsa, thanks for that. That's Nitsa Soledad Perez in Miami. Well, the political chaos is also being felt on financial markets. Brazil's currency fell on Monday after Bolsonaro supporters stormed the capital. The Brazilian real weakened roughly about 1% against the dollar in spot trading.
And more international flights carrying passengers from China have been arriving at destinations all around the world. This comes after the country dropped a number of COVID border controls on Sunday for both inbound and outbound travel. Sensei Yuan reports from Beijing.
I was saying that we're seeing so many happy tears and warm hugs at the airports. Some say they are coming in to surprise their families for the upcoming Spring Festival when they heard about a policy change. However, bear in mind that travelers still need to obtain valid 48-hour negative PCR test results for entry. The good news is no quarantine is needed. I think one of the changes many passengers have mentioned is that the flight attendants no longer need to wear a protective suit while on board. It feels quite unfamiliar to them since the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, what I want to add here is that we're mostly seeing inbound traffic while searching for international destination have spiked. I have talked to travel agencies that outbound international travels had yet to resume it to its full capacity. Here, I mean major tour groups as well as for bundles like hotel and ticket. The Ministry of Culture and Tourism has yet to release official documents for traveling out of China spring tour. The travel agency says that hotel and air ticket packages are yet to go online. They're closely monitoring the development since it's an important season for their earnings. What travelers need to keep in mind is that if they choose to go abroad, they need to pay attention to visa issuing services as well as COVID-19 related policy of their destination overseas and also outbound flights. We're seeing lines for people who want to obtain travel permits to go to Macau and Hong Kong Special Administration, with international yet to resume to its full capacity.
Sensei Yuan reporting there from Beijing. Well, Chinese tourists were also a big source of revenue for European countries, including Greece, where the tourism industry took a major hit from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Now, Athens has followed other EU countries in asking for a negative COVID test from those visitors arriving from China. Well, CGTN's Evangelo Sipsas is in Athens. Good to see you, Evangelo. Of course, we've talked about that new flight linking Shanghai to Athens that launched at the end of last year. I mean, what's the feeling then as the country's welcoming this new influx of travellers from China?
Well, the mood here in the Greek capital is quite divided because on the one hand we have the government who followed the EU recommendations to impose different measures for those traveling from China, but then on the other hand we have business owners or people working in the tourism industry who are waiting for this moment for China to open up and people to come and visit the country for almost 3 years now since the pandemic broke out. They're expected for those Chinese nationals to come here because they're a large part of the revenue of the tourism and the hospitality industry. We went around in the Greek capital and we spoke to some of those owners, and what they told us is that they're not afraid of it and they know how to live with COVID-19. The U-turn comes a few days after direct flights between the two countries were inaugurated. But businesses seem to have a different approach.
To be honest, I'm not afraid at all. I have many Chinese clients and I know that they will respect us and take all precautions so they can be safe and make sure that we will be safe.
Late last week in a government meeting, the Ministry of Health decided to impose measures which include a negative COVID-19 test 48 hours prior to departure for travelers from China and the use of high protection masks at all Greek airports. Additional measures include sewage collection from airports with international flights and aircrafts arriving from China. All the above measures are a complete reversal of stance of Greek authorities, who only last week said there will be no special restrictions for those traveling from China. Now, there is concern over the increased surge of cases and fears that the virus could possibly spread again. But restaurant owners say that COVID-19 has become a way of life and that they're more concerned of inflation rather than those traveling from China.
I'm not concerned at all. I'm sure that before they leave China they will be fully vaccinated and take all safety measures. Yes, we have to be careful, but not only for air travellers from China, but everywhere. I'm looking forward to the Chinese coming to Greece.
The virus is a thing of the past, and I'm not worried about it at all. It's become part of everyday life. We've taken all measures, from tests to vaccinations, so I don't think Chinese tourists are the problem. Quite the contrary. The real problem we face at the moment is inflation. That's our main worry.
During almost 3 years of strict measures and limited flights, Greek tourism almost collapsed. After coming out of the pandemic, though, the tourism sector is rebounding with record numbers of arrivals, even higher than those from 2019. And those numbers are expected to increase as more flights from China were announced. 250,000 Chinese tourists visited the country in 2019, and the Ministry of Tourism now is saying that more than 600,000 are expected for this summer alone. That's why on January 19th, the Ministry of Health will be sitting down with a delegation from the tourism sector as well as the hospitality sector to discuss whether they will impose further restrictions or they will ease the ones that are already in place.
Evangelos Ipsas in Athens at the airport, thank you very much.
Let's talk more about the resumption of tourism from China with Julia Simpson, President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council. Thank you very much for joining us. Julia, let's start with how important China's return is for the global travel and tourism industry.
Well, after 3 years of not seeing any Chinese visitors globally, and particularly in Europe and the US, it's such great news that finally Chinese travellers are travelling again. And if I can give you a number to illustrate that, the Chinese are the biggest spenders globally. Spending in 2019, if we look at that as the benchmark year pre-COVID, of $253 billion. That's 15% of all spending to do with travel and tourism.
And looking at Europe then, how reliant are hospitality and tourism businesses in this part of the world on visitors from China?
Yes, well, it is about that. I mean, if you look at some countries, like you had Athens, great package from Athens there, it can be sort of 5, 6, 7%. It varies a lot. London is very dependent. We have a lot of Chinese visitors, particularly love shopping in London, although terrible rain at the moment, but it's going to pass, so don't worry. So we're really looking forward to getting Chinese visitors back. They're absolutely great. And if you look at the value of travel and tourism to China, is its own economy. In 2019, it was worth almost $2 trillion, and it employed 82 million people. So it's really critical, I think, that China also, for itself, in terms of receiving visitors, gets back up on its feet.
And the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic has been pretty strong in some parts of the world, Europe, for example, but in others, Asia, East Asia in particular, it hasn't been as strong. Do you think, now that the borders have reopened, that confidence will quickly return?
I think so. We saw Japan open not that long ago. I was in Manila in the Philippines at the beginning of last year, and they reopened. So we are seeing the whole area reopen, which, if you like, completes the picture. The people I think we'll see travelling, first of all, are what we call friends and family. These are people who've been separated for a long time, that are just desperate to get on the flight to see their loved ones, or students abroad that haven't been able to travel home. That's the normal pattern that we saw with countries that reopened. Obviously, at the World Travel and Tourism Council, we represent the whole of the private sector in travel and tourism. And to put it mildly, we're not best pleased about some of the COVID travel restrictions that are being put upon Chinese visitors, and indeed when we visit China, because we believe we should follow WHO, the World Health Organization's advice on this. And, you know, viruses don't pitch up at borders with their passports. This virus is now completely globally endemic. You do not stop it by putting restrictions at borders. And as your great package from Greece said, it's a part of life now. It's like flu. In fact, I know lots of friends of mine that have had flu this year and COVID, and the flu was worse. So I think we need to learn to live with it.
And just lastly, briefly, if you will, Julia, the bounce back has been strong then. Looking forward, how would you assess where the industry is headed, particularly given the global challenges facing the world?
Well, I think, you know, that looking at it globally, it used to be a nearly $10 trillion business. That meant that of every dollar made globally on this planet, $1 came from travel and tourism. And 1 in 10 jobs came from travel and tourism. Now, we were one of the worst hit sectors, but things are bouncing back. And we expect that globally over the next 10 years, we will be growing faster than global GDP. So we are a growth sector, and we will be probably getting to over $14 trillion worth of business. When I talked to tour operators, I was with an American tour operator the day before yesterday. Business is booming. It is exceeding 2019 numbers.
Thanks for that, Julia. That's Julia Simpson, President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council.
Thank you very much.
Still ahead, over 6,000 people treated themselves to a Rolls-Royce last year, including this Spectre, its new electric car. We'll speak to the CEO next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Now, Rolls-Royce sales entered the fast lane in 2022 with over 6,000 cars sold, 8% up on the previous year, and the best performance in the firm's 119-year history. Sales in China dipped slightly due to COVID lockdowns, but still made up a quarter of the total, while the United States accounted for around a third. Now, customisation was a key factor as buyers fitted out cars to their very specific own requirements. Now, while sales of the company's first fully electric car exceeded expectations. Well, let's talk to Torsten Müller-Opfer. He's the CEO of Rolls-Royce Motors and joins us now from Goodwood in southern England. Always great to see you, Torsten. Well, I've got to say, you know, cost of living crisis. What cost of living crisis? You've had a rather good year.
Yeah, good afternoon, Juliet. No, it was a record year, as you rightly stated. And even without Spectre, because Spectre is not yet available, we have seen a very strong pre-order book, obviously, for that car, but it's not yet included in these over 6,000 cars. So that is basically Cullinan, Ghost and Phantom who did it. And even despite crises like the Ukraine war and the seizing of the Russian market, we were able to compensate all that. And have seen a fantastic growth last year and performance all over the world. So I'm really delighted about that.
All over the world you've seen growth, except for China. I mean, is that a blip, and how are you working to change that?
That's rightly, and you put it exactly right, that's a little blip. It's a couple of percentage points only. I mean, it's still the second best ever year our Chinese team and our partners in China delivered. And I think it's a great result given all the circumstances around COVID. And I'm pretty sure that once the market recovers and also is that pandemic, then we're going to see again excellent growth in the Chinese market, because that market is for us out of strategic importance. We have lots of very loyal, long-standing clients in the Chinese market. And I'm also very glad that now travel is back and that clients can come to Goodwood again after 3 years to sit here with our designers to spec their dream cars.
Well, talking about your designers and all of the other members of your team, you've given your staff bumper pay rises. Were you worried about the threat of strike action, which we've seen quite a lot here in the UK?
No, it is something what we need to put into a broader picture. I mean, at times when Corona hit us here, also in Europe, we were very cautious with any pay rises to our staff, and our staff fully understand that this is the right moment to do. Now, obviously, with such a great year, it is well deserved that we're increasing pay by 10% and that we are putting an extra of £2,000 into each one's pocket. So I think well deserved, and also in that broader picture of what we have done over the course of the last years, absolutely right, and rightly so. And it was not in any way affected by, oh, a potential strike might loom or whatever. Not at all. It is us making a deal, a fair deal also for our employees, because they are the ones who are delivering these record numbers.
So we've talked about the people, let's talk about the products. I know the possibilities are endless, but in terms of customisation, what are the trends you're spotting? I mean, how would you design your next Rolls?
Yeah, I mean, what we see particular, and allow me to touch on China, we see in China quite a lot of very young clients, and they go for what I would call fashion-influenced, very flamboyant car specification, be it colors, be it the way how they trim the interior, what kind of materials are used, and particularly the younger ones are pretty bold, and that is a general picture, not only China, but also all over the world. You will see here, if you would be with us, quite a lot of stunning, bold cars going down the line, and I must say I like that. My personal specification is exactly behind us, and that is what we did with Spectre. That is the spec I personally loved a lot. Designers came up with that idea. It's called Chartreuse. That color, it's a French liquor, and beautiful. And for that reason, that's my car behind.
And I'm still waiting for the invitation to go for a test drive. Torsten Müller-Opfer, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
You will be invited.
I'm going to hold you to that. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Juliet.
Lucky Juliet. Well, from one luxury car maker to another, and the CEO who started washing dishes when he first started his career. In our regular feature, My First Job, we hear from the boss of Mercedes-Benz, Ola Kalenius.
My very first job was working at a restaurant, and I was doing the dishes. But the second summer, it was a summer job, and the second summer I actually moved up to being an assistant helping the cooks in the kitchen. So I guess what I learned is work hard, have ambition, and there is possibility for you to move up.
Goldman Sachs is axing more than 3,000 jobs as it tries to rein in costs. The cuts are company-wide and start from Wednesday. It's set to be one of the largest ever layoffs at the investment bank. Let's go to New York and our correspondent John Terrett, who's there for us live. John, this has been rumoured for a while, but unlikely to go down well with those being laid off.
Well, it has been rumoured for a while. Back in November, I think, and certainly in the middle of December, I remember reporting on the rumours, and the rumours were that Goldman Sachs were going to sack about 4,000 of its staff. Now, the thing is, what we have today is that two people have come forward and spoken to the media, and they say that the announcement of Goldman Sachs will come on probably Wednesday, midweek of this coming week, and Bloomberg, which is very on the ball when it comes to this kind of financial reporting, is saying that the number will actually be 3,200. But don't hold us to that, because it could be more, it could be less. We simply don't know. Now, the thing is, all these big banks are doing this here on Wall Street. So you've got Citigroup, the global behemoth, you've got Morgan Stanley, you've got Barclays, of course, you've got Credit Suisse. They've all been showing the door to bankers in the last couple of months. And the reason for that is all these banks, like many of the tech companies in America, took on too many staff during the pandemic, and now things are slowing down. They realize they don't need them, so they're being let go. Now, what's odd about this is that this used to be a Wall Street tradition. For many years, the banks and other companies associated with Wall Street would actually let the underperforming 5 or 10% of their staff go. And the thinking behind this, as promoted by Jack Welch, who used to run General Electric, he used to say, look, you get rid of the underperforming 5 or 10%, they're gone, so they're happier doing other things that they can be more productive at, and then they bring in another 5 or 10% to replace them, and everybody's happy. That certainly was the thinking. Now, Goldman Sachs is the bank to work for. There's another one called BlackRock, but just forget about that for the time being. Goldman Sachs is the place to be if you want to work on Wall Street. And you could join as a young man or woman, and you could work your way up the ranks. You can get paid a lot of money if you do well. But many of the administrations in Washington, D.C. take their advisory staff from Goldman Sachs. So it doesn't matter which party is in, Republican or Democrat. Very often, those advising the president will have come at some point from Goldman Sachs. Now, the CEO is called David Solomon. He has an odd hobby. At the weekends, he's a part-time DJ. He likes to spin the platters that matter down in the clubs of Long Island. But he's considered to be quite a sensible banker and a large, towering figure on Wall Street, although there has been some criticism of him lately about the way he's been running the bank. But he's still there and not showing any signs of moving on. And, of course, the banks are doing what the tech companies have begun doing. Meta platform, Twitter, you know about, Amazon last week, Salesforce, a major Dow Jones component last week, all laying off staff now. And McDonald's, I see, McDonald's Corporation, which is based in Chicago, is the latest big U.S. name to start talking about the possibility of cutting jobs at the corporate level. So people that flip burgers, I think, unlikely to be let go. But at the corporate level in Chicago, job loss is coming there as well, as these big companies brace for a possible recession and try to protect their share price. Juliet and Naweed?
Let's look ahead then. This will be a busy week, John, for politics as well as Wall Street.
Yes. Yeah, it's a cracking week, actually, for news, because we've got the Three Amigos Summit getting underway today in Mexico. Now, the Americans love to give a name to everything, and they call this summit the Three Amigos Summit after the famous film, which starred Steve Martin and Chevy Chase and Martin Short. So the Three Amigos will meet in Mexico City, and they are Joe Biden, President of the United States, Justin Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of Canada, and Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who, thank goodness, is known locally as AMLO. And AMLO is the President of Mexico. I know. They're going to be talking about immigration and border security in the economy, and also drug smuggling as well, particularly heroin, which is a major problem in America. Now, on the political front, the House in Washington, D.C. finally got its act together late on Friday night, and the new Speaker is Kevin McCarthy, after everything we witnessed last week. So the House is moving forward. On Wall Street, we get Jerome Powell, the chairman of the central bank, speaking at 14 hours GMT on Tuesday morning. So just as you guys go on the the air tomorrow. He'll be giving a positioning statement ahead of the next interest rate hike, which will come on the 1st of February. We've got CPI, consumer price inflation, which is crucial on Thursday. And we have bank earnings getting underway for the fourth quarter on Friday. Citi, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America. And finally, today, we had a very strong Friday. We have a very strong Monday as well. The markets are all up. And the reason for that, I will tell you, is a very large part of it is China's reopening, which you've been talking about on the show.
John, a busy week ahead for you, then we'll check in the next few days. That's John Terrett live in New York.
More than 10,000 ambulance workers in Britain will walk out on Wednesday as planned after talks between the government and trades unions failed. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is meeting union leaders this week, hoping to end nationwide industrial action across sectors from healthcare to transport. Tens of thousands of workers have gone on strike in recent weeks to demand better working conditions and pay rises in line with inflation.
The Swiss National Bank announced an annual loss of $143 billion in 2022, the biggest in its 115-year history. The bank said a strong Swiss franc, along with falling stock and fixed income markets, hit the value of its share and bond portfolio.
Welsh footballer Gareth Bale, once the most expensive footballer in the world, has retired from the sport with immediate effect. Bale finished his career leading Wales at their first World Cup final since 1958. He played for Southampton and Tottenham before joining Real Madrid in 2013 for a then record fee of $108 million, winning 5 Champions Leagues during his 9 years in the Spanish capital.
Coming up on CGTN. Billions needed to rebuild homes, roads and railways after Pakistan's deadly floods. A UN conference aims to raise the money.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Louisa Barkle and me, Juliet Mann. The headlines again. The full force of the law. Brazil's president promises rioters will be punished as police regain control of Congress after it was stormed by protesters.
And China reopens, a huge boost for the travel sector as Beijing lifts restrictions on the world's biggest outbound tourism market.
The United Nations has called for massive support to help Pakistan rebuild after last year's devastating floods.
Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has been attending a conference in Geneva, seeking pledges towards a $16 billion clean-up fund. Speaking at the event, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called September's floods a climate disaster of monumental scale. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Geneva for us. Alex, what's been said there then at this important meeting?
Well, the first thing we've heard was about the plight of the Pakistani people last year. That's through the summer and into the autumn. Those devastating floods described by the UN Secretary-General as climate carnage. That was really the focus. It's very easy in these high-level meetings to lose focus on the situation on the ground. 1,700 people lost their lives, including children. 8 million people displaced as well. Now, the response from the international community to that request. Now, Pakistan said they can probably cover about 8 billion of that 16 billion cleanup costs. They need another 8 billion. We've heard different figures about the pledges, but there have been pledges from across the world. But really, the main thrust of the discussion was about the plight of the Pakistani people, those painful months that we've saw all too closely in last year. There's also a broader conversation about where do we go from here? How does the international community deal with these issues in a more structural matter? The conversation around loss and damage, wealthier polluting countries compensating those countries disproportionately affected by climate change. That discussion has been central as well. The Secretary-General of the UN saying if you want to see loss, if there was ever a question about loss and damage, go to Pakistan, you will see loss, you will see damage. So that is the kind of broader conversation that's going on here. When and how does the international community set up a more permanent, more long-term framework? Because unfortunately, this may not be the last event of its kind that we see, and the UN and the international community want to find a way to have a more permanent solution to that. But certainly, the pain, the suffering, the displacement, the lives lost in Pakistan last year, very central to the discussions today.
And do we have a sense of how much has been pledged so far? And how important is it for the Pakistani side that those pledges are met? We've seen conferences, summits like this in the past where pledges are made but not always kept.
Well, it's extremely important. We have different figures coming from different places. At the moment, some news agencies, the AP is reporting $9 billion have been pledged. Now, that would exceed what the Pakistani government was hoping. The UN Secretary-General saying that if we reach that $8 billion target, we will be pleased. Good work has been done, but it is not a permanent fix. It's not a permanent solution. So certainly some very, very large pledges coming in. 360 million from the French, 100 million from China, an extra 100 million from the United States, who had previously pledged 100 million last summer. So that's 200 million for the United States, and the European Union also getting close to that $100 million figure. So really, pledges coming from around the world, a real sense of solidarity. But that term solidarity is an interesting one, because is it solidarity? Well, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, saying this isn't solidarity, this is justice. This is justice against the unjust treatment, the unfairness of this climate crisis and the way it affected Pakistan. So these pledges are important, very important to the Pakistani government. They've organized a very, very large delegation coming here and trying to ask for this support. But the UN being very clear, this isn't just helping out, this is fair. What's fair is fair. This is justice for the people of Pakistan. But again, that funding has been pledged, but the rebuilding will only start and will take a very, very long time, especially for the economy. We know that hundreds of kilometers of railway tracks have been destroyed, roads have been destroyed. 40% of the crops for cotton in Pakistan have been destroyed, 15% of the crops for rice. So this is a huge blow to the economy. This is going to take months, if not years, but the UN today seems a good place to start.
Alex Cadier for us live in Geneva. Thanks, Alex.
We had some big numbers there from Alex Cadier, and more than 1,700 people died. More than 33 million people were affected by last year's record-breaking rain in Pakistan.
Billions of dollars worth of infrastructure was also destroyed. Our correspondent Danielle Khan looks back at the long-term implications for the country.
According to Pakistan's Disaster Management Authority, the southern province of Sindh and adjoining province of Balochistan remain the worst hit.
At its peak, more than one-third of Pakistan was underwater. So that's a huge area, and even as much of the water has been drained out, There was a point at which there were huge new bodies of water the size of the United Kingdom over the province of Sindh. So it's been quite catastrophic.
The United Nations chief Antonio Guterres described the catastrophe as a monsoon on steroids. It resulted in damage to more than 13,000 kilometers of road networks, as well as more than 2 million houses, which were either partially or completely destroyed. Experts say Pakistan will have to adapt and find solutions for the future as they fear recurring natural disasters in the years ahead.
We have to think about it because in future it would be a matter which we would be facing on every rain, and it is very alarming for the Pakistani nation. We need dams. We have to store the water. And we have to go into small dams, big dams, because dam also helps to retain the water, and it helps to stop the floods. It helps to minimize the flood disasters.
1 million livestock was lost, as well as thousands of acres of agriculture land. According to the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment report prepared by the government, with assistance from the United Nations and other international organizations, the total damage is estimated to exceed $14.9 billion and total economic losses to reach about $15.2 billion. And the misery hasn't ended, as thousands of women and children still suffer from health crises caused by the flooding.
Pakistan's carbon footprint is less than 1%. The country does not contribute to global warming, but remains on the forefront of global impacts of warming and is among the 10 countries most impacted by disasters related to climate change. Experts say the international community needs to step up and help Pakistan adapt to climate change-related events. Otherwise, the consequences of inaction to fight climate change could raise greater turmoil for Pakistan in the years to come. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Islamabad.
2 people have been killed in a Russian missile strike in eastern Ukraine. The attack, which hit a market in the Kharkiv region, left several other civilians wounded, including a 10-year-old girl. Ukraine's president says his troops are holding on to the besieged city of Bakhmut, which has been at the centre of renewed shelling. Volodymyr Zelensky says most of Bakhmut has now been destroyed by Russian fire, describing conditions on the ground as very difficult.
Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang has talked to his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, vowing to work together to promote China-Russia ties. Both officials also exchanged views over the conflict in Ukraine, with Qin claiming Beijing's approach to the war will be fair and just.
A cargo ship carrying Ukrainian grain that ran aground in the Suez Canal has been refloated. The MV Glory was carrying 65,000 tons of grain when it broke down in the waterway close to the city of Kantara. Tugboats have moved the vessel into a repair area, and it's now due to continue its trip to China.
Still ahead on CGTN.
Guys, I've lost you.
I fell in love with Chinese culture the second I started to experience it.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
Building bridges is a natural thing. There is no age and gender difference in our spirit, no race difference in our soul.
I think food is an incredible way of bringing different cultures together. I am enjoying learning every aspect about it.
Chinese literature stretches back for millennia, but it's still really relevant for today.
I hope that Chinese and British fashion community could be more frequently communicating with each other.
An incredible mix of people, cultures, food, and there is so much to see and so much to do.
I have a great desire to make the Chinese civilization more accessible.
It's about our future generation's future.
The craftsmanship, the technique, the material uses, the color uses.
You can kind of take things on board and continue to develop and grow.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Everything seems to have a story. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. A huge tick.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Skiers can hit the slopes at last after a big snow dump in the Alps.
High temperatures and heavy rain over the new year left some resorts without their usual snowfall, and a number of resorts had to shut down. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports from Italy.
Well, the skiing's fun, anyway.
Compared to Swiss or Austrian slopes, Italy's Alps are still relatively wide. But here too, skiers need to search more widely to find natural snow.
Snow cannons producing artificial snow have laboriously kept this skiing slope operational, even as the rest of the mountain turns greener and greener. Tarvisio, here in Italy's northeast, is lucky though, managing to open almost 2/3 of its slopes, while many other resorts in Italy remain closed and fear bankruptcy.
Ski resorts located at lower altitudes worry the season is over before it even started. Whenever there was precipitation, temperatures were still too high for snow to fall, and the same conditions have made it impossible for artificial snow production. In Tarvisio, the slopes descend to 800 meters, so any predicted snowfall at lower levels will likely turn to rain. Parts of the valley which are wide are set to be washed away.
Places like this one are perhaps destined to close.
All that is happening here is telling us that things are changing.
Over the last year, this region recorded temperatures 2 degrees warmer than normal, with a climate that is increasingly unpredictable.
There are normal periods, and then there are periods with many variables, such as elevated temperatures or precisely the lack of rain or snowfall. So we'll have to adapt more and more to these imbalances.
How long Tarvisio's slopes can survive in these conditions remains to be seen. Cabin owner Jure Prešern is hoping for the best.
We took advantage of the only 2 cold days at -10 that there were, to be able to prepare the slopes with snow cannons. Now we lack at least 1 metre of fresh snow, or at least 5 days of cold to prepare the slopes well enough to hold the whole season.
Long-term forecasts suggest this winter will remain warmer than average, so skiers and snowboarders will have to go higher and higher to find a winter landscape. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Tarvisio, Italy.
Space history will be made later with the first rocket launch on UK soil. 9 orbital satellites are set to blast off from a small seaside town in Cornwall in southwest England.
Virgin Orbit's mission is the first satellite launched from Western Europe and could mark the beginning of a new era for the British space industry. Thousands of people are expected to watch the rocket take off. Well, our correspondent John Beaver is at that launch site in Cornwall. John, tell us more about what we can expect from the launch. I can hear crowds behind you. Is there a mood of excitement?
Yeah, I think there is, to be honest, because like you say, this is not something that is been seen here before and is certainly not an everyday occurrence. What's interesting as well is actually the technology behind this. This is not what we see in Florida or the Mojave Desert or one of those sorts of places with a rocket taking off behind me. What we see here, this is Newquay Airport on the north coast of Cornwall. It has a very long runway here, and so what's going to happen is there is a jumbo jet with a rocket strapped to the bottom of it. It's going to take off from here. It's going to make its way towards Southern Ireland, and when it's safely over the ocean, then the pilots push what is known as the big red button, and the rocket will drop from the bottom of the plane and then will ignite and head up into orbit. That's the plan anyway. They've done it before and it's worked, so they're hoping for a repeat of that success here, and it would see the UK joining this next new exciting era of the space race and helping get satellites into orbit.
And maybe help get satellites into orbit more economically than the way they're done at the moment. How significant could this be for the UK's space industry and the industry in general?
Yeah, it could be hugely significant because the UK for a long time has been known for designing and building satellites, and it now wants to help launch them as well. Of course, things like this aren't cheap, are they? This tiny building here that's about a mile away from me is actually the big space hangar. That apparently costs about £20 million, so just over $20 million. But then the actual cost of launch itself, hugely expensive as well. But the prices are coming down, and this whole aim is that multiple companies can put satellites on board this. So there are 9 satellites on board there from different companies, used for things, everything from satellite navigation to surveying the world's oceans are what these satellites are going to be used for. And lots of smaller companies can join together to get their own satellites into orbit. So that, it seems, is where we're going, that we're going to make space more affordable. Still very expensive, but more affordable than it has been.
John Beaver, the UK's answer to Cape Canaveral, I suppose. Thank you very much.
And finally, how much would you pay for a toilet? $80? $500?
How about $10,000? Because that's how much this high-tech model is going to set you back. It comes with, I mean, who knew you needed this in the toilet? Built-in Amazon Alexa and mood lighting. It can play music, news and weather reports. It also had a lid that lifts automatically and is self-cleaning, which I think is the least we should expect.
The high-tech toilet is one of the innovations on display at this year's Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
Do you want one?
Oh, well, I like the ones in Japan, actually. So, yeah, this is taking it to a whole new level, yeah.
The headlines again. The full force of the law. Brazil's president promises rioters will be punished as police regain control of Congress after it was stormed by protesters.
China reopens a huge boost for the travel sector as Beijing lifts restrictions on the world's biggest outgoing tourist population.
And the UN has called for multi-billion-dollar support to help Pakistan rebuild after last year's devastating floods.
I might need a bit of a pay rise to afford that toilet, but it's all...
Still talking about
that's
the
it
toilet.
for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching. Incredible amounts of money, isn't it?
But there's more on all of our stories, including the toilet, at europe.cgtn.com. And do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're also on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Well, coming up next on the Weeks in the Toilet, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.